So we have in front of us an application which has an index view, and the index view in CakePHP that you bake has the ability to sort by database fields. So we can just click on things and get a sort descending, so it says direction equals ascending or descending. The sort by tells you which database field it's sorting by. Here you have a limit ability, so you can change the number of records that are paginated, so per page, the records per page. And then you have pagination at the bottom, plus also you'd have a page statistics really. So it's saying that there's 12,000 total records, and in the case of being 6 per page, that's going to make 2,034 pages. So all that's part of a default cake bake of your templates, and also within these index views you might have a view button where you can look at records. You might also have edit functionality where you can go and make changes or even do some deletes. And so what we're going to do is we're going to implement this plus the ability to do a quantity per page using Inertia and React. So to get started, let's install Inertia. Now as we start to install Inertia, there's going to be problems that we're going to come up against. Now the problem that we're going to have to deal with is that this application is served from a subdirectory. So this WMS subdirectory is a little bit of an issue, because when we try to find assets, this is not part of the physical file system, so it gets confused as to where things are located, so we'll have to code around that. This application also uses the BootstrapUI plugin to provide us with all these nice Bootstrap 5 stylings, and we're going to have to use part of the Bootstrap styling in order to integrate it with Inertia, while still keeping some of the default application application features that we still want to keep. So what we're going to do is we're going to take everything from the nav bar down and make it into Inertia and React, and we're going to keep everything on the nav bar as part of just the default CakePHP, which can be a challenge. So let's go through solving the problems as they arise. So the first thing we've done is we've installed our Inertia plugin, and as with all plugins, you just need to tell CakePHP to activate the plugin, and then once you do that you can issue a cake plugin loaded command. And in this list of plugins, the ones that have been installed when we chose to install Inertia with this require statement is the Asset Mix plugin and the Inertia plugins. So now that we've got those installed, it then asks us to generate the front-end scaffolding. So we're going to generate React in this case. So I'm just going to copy not the Inertia view, but I'm going to just paste this in, type in help, and have a look at the options, and the one we want is Inertia React, so we can copy that. And notice in our source tree at the moment there's not an assets directory, and we have a composer JSON, so just be mindful that this composer JSON has some dependencies already in it, but the Inertia Asset Mix plugin will overwrite this package JSON, so just be aware that that's going to happen if you've got a package JSON already in the root of your folders. So what I'm doing there is just copying in what was blown away by running this. Now, as you can see, we've got an assets directory now, a CSS folder to compile our CSS for our Inertia front end. We've got a React/InertiaJS entry point, create Inertia app file here, and then we've got a directory where we can build out our Inertia pages as we need them. So that's given us much of what we need. One of the other things it says here on the command line, just do an npm install, and to get all these different dev dependencies installed. And once you've done that, I found that it was a good idea also to run the npm update as well, so that some of these versions might need to be updated. So we can, as soon as that's finished pulling all in the npm packages, we can run an update as well. Alright, so going down through the instructions, the Inertia plugin says, well, grab your default template layout file and add some special code to Inertiaize it. But our particular application here doesn't use that default template layout file. So if we have a look in our code, we just want to run npm update here. If we have a look in our code, we can see that our templates directory, underneath our layout, in our layout directory, there is no default layout here. And so the instructions as they stand will cause it to fail because it won't be able to find this. So we're going to have to make some changes to figure out, firstly, well, what template or layout files are we using? If you click on your include button underneath on your DevTools, your CakePHP debug kit tools, and go to the other, you can see that we've got here a entry point. This our first file called for our Cake application is the index file, and then a whole heap of files get pulled in, all the different autoloaders, config. Now here it starts to pull in the template, which then builds out the view that we see. So we're currently in the shipments index view, and so there we see the template there, but then we see a whole heap of inclusions that that template brings in. And here we see something significant. It's our layout file, and it's the dashboard layout here, and we find that ultimately we also have this Twitter Bootstrap default layout. And so InertiaJS says you need to use that default layout. So we're going to copy our Twitter Bootstrap dashboard and our Twitter Bootstrap default files into another directory so we can modify them. So we go into layout, grab dashboard, click on default, copy them both, create a new folder called Inertia, and paste them in. Now, are we getting closer to getting things working? Well, we've got some more instructions here that we're going to have to follow, but I'm just going to do them as I think of them. Now here it says we want to set up in our controller, it says to do this application wide, do it in app controller, and then all the other controllers will inherit this use inertia response trait and inertiaize everything, but we don't want to do that. We just want to do it a limited, maybe just one controller for the time being. So let's get that working. So we're going to create a controller, and we're going to go bin cake bake controller, and we're going to call this controller the dispatch controller. because we're going to be duplicating this shipment screen here. If I just close here, we're going to be duplicating, it's a screen we use to dispatch pallets to different places around Australia, but we're going to basically duplicate this, but I'm going to call it the dispatch controller. So this will be our entry point to all our Inertia stuff underneath dispatch controller. Now, right at the moment it's saying cannot describe dispatch, it has 0 columns. Well, there's a good reason for that. Let's close all our dispatch and go to our index view, and finding it's trying to paginate a model that doesn't exist. So we're going to be duplicating a different model. So I'm going to do this manually and say fetch the shipments table, and also we're going to not paginate a model, we're going to paginate a find query. And so we get rid of all this and say query, and then just so that we know that this is shipments, and we just do that. Now if we now go back, and we'll find, okay, now it's saying it's missing a template, and right at this moment it's saying I'm missing a CakePHP template. So it still isn't Inertia enabled, so we now need to go in and go into our controller, and we're going to use the customized before render hook here, and we're going to modify things. So we're going to use this code here to pull in this Inertia response trait, and to do that we just go up to the top of the controller and paste this in. Now straight away it's going to complain because we haven't pulled in our use statement, so we're just going to click on our and pull in the correct interfaces. So we have a look, and we've pulled those in at the top. Now once we've done that, it should change to having another complaint. Now remember before, in the first part of the installation, it says that it's going to look for this layout file here, and as you can see it's looking for templates layout default, and it's not finding it because that file doesn't exist for us. No, our template, or our default template, is the one that we've copied across. So we've got our layout from our Twitter Bootstrap, and we've copied our default layout across to this Inertia folder. So what we want to do is make this layout the default. So here we have very helpful under the before render method. Now we see the before render method is called after the controller actions run but before the view is rendered. So this will be a good place for us to override and say, well, before you render it, change the view template. So I'll go this view builder, and then I go set template. Now here it says it's going to look for a string template, and it's a template, so it already knows, sorry, not set layout, I've just done that wrong, set layout, let's do that. So it already knows it's a layout, it already knows, so all that is, but we want to just put in the relative path. Now if we leave it with default PHP, we can see that, and then we obviously need to close. But if we leave it as the way it is right there, it will still complain, because notice that it's adding a .php to the end of things. So you just need to trim that as well, and then it will know the correct path. So we just reload that. And now we have our inertiaized controller, the dispatch controller, pulling in our default layout, and the default layout just has a copyright statement and nothing else. But what we're aiming to do is we're aiming to get this view available to our dispatch controller here. So how do we go about doing that? Well, we might do this while we're here. We just want to add this in. So we're saying to the default layout, we want to add this asset mix script. So we'll have to go in here and so right. Now this might cause an issue, but we'll be right. Now I think this is going to fail. Yeah. So the mix manifest doesn't exist. Now why does it say that? It's looking for something. So we need to go in and say npm run. I'm going to just run the watch command. If we have a look at our run commands, we've got a bunch of different ones. We could run dev and it'll run it once, but I want to run it every time something changes. So I'm just going to run the watch command and it will compile our files. Now what it's done, it's put in, if we have a look in our web root, it's compiled an app CSS file. And then if we look in JS, it's compiled an app.js file. And then finally, it's got a mix manifest JSON. So we can see here that this manifest file is what tells the application where the assets are located and what specific IDs they have. Because when the ID changes, it tells the browser to grab the file again. It won't pull from a cache if the ID's changed on this query string. So that's what it's looking for there. I'm just going to refresh again and see if it complains. Right, and now it's complaining about not being able to find WMS.js app ? And this string. So we need to fix that particular problem as well. Now it's using a class here called the mix class and passing in a URL, and then once it's resolved that URL to the actual path to this JS app file, it then returns a script tag so that the client knows where to grab the app.js file or the app CSS file from the server. But right at this moment it's saying it's unable to locate the asset mix file. So how do we find this problem? So what I'm going to do is just copy the error message and go to my Explorer here. Now we know that if we have a look back at the error message, it's saying under vendor Ishan, this is where the error is being generated. So let's now search that directory. So we go vendor, and we'll go right click. We didn't go further down because we know it's in the Ishan directory. So right click, find in folder, and we find here in our mix PHP folder this being thrown, the error message is being thrown. Now there's something that's a problem here, is that this file is in the vendor directory, and so if I start to modify this to fix the problem, I'm going to then have modified code in the vendor directory, and then it's going to be a real problem if we ever want to upgrade or reinstall. And in this particular case, it's not very easy to override this specific class mix.php. So what we're going to have to do is make a decision to move our plugins into our project folder so that we can just modify them, keep them under version control, and we'll have to manually do upgrades for these particular plugins in the future because of the modifications we've made. So to do that, we're going to move from vendor, we're going to move the asset mix folder, and we need to put it into a plugins directory in our project, and it must be named the name of the plugin. So go bin cake plugin. If this might fail, it does, because I've already moved the folder, but basically it's one of the names of these. So we need to get CakePHP, do the same thing, and we know that Inertia is the name of this plugin, so we name it Inertia. So we've now moved our plugins from our vendor directory into our project directory, so we can look after them with regard to version control. Just noticing that it breaks everything. So if I go Composer and press enter, we've got a broken Composer because it's now basically we've moved stuff and it's now confused the autoloader. So what I do, I've got a version of Composer installed that still runs in user local bin. So what I can do is, firstly, I want to go to my Composer.json, and now that I've moved those plugins, I want to remove our InertiaJS plugin from being a Composer dependency. Excuse me, because it will cause problems. It'll be in conflict if we use it for upgrades and that in the future. So I've removed that plugin from Composer, moved it into my plugins folder here, and now we can start to make the changes and repairs that we need to make. So let's just have a look. We've still got an issue now when we press to do that. We've got a problem with dispatch, not finding it. If we go Composer, let's have a look, and we do dump auto load, that normally should rebuild our auto loading, but we notice that when we reload it still cannot find it. So we need to do something to tell CakePHP how to auto load anything in the Inertia namespace and anything in the asset namespace. Now we can get a good hint on what to do by looking at the plugin Composer JSONs, because it tells us that in this case it's asset mix src like that, but we now need to put this into our project Composer JSON. We go find our auto load, but in this case we want to say it's not in src, it's in plugins asset mix /src. Now the very same thing is here, so we want to go Inertia, so it's the same problem there, and then we just reload. Now it's still an issue, so let's see if we can tell it to update. And right, so now we've got another issue. Now it's saying, looking in this asset mix namespace, it's looking for a function called starts with, and it cannot find that. So this is something that's a little bit unique to this plugin. If we go into the asset mix plugins directory here and have a look at Composer, we find that it's also saying, it's along with auto loading this namespace, just pull in this functions PHP, because inside, if we have a look inside the functions PHP, that we've got a starts with function that the plugin uses, that it needs to be referenced. So we've now got to do this, so we'll copy that, go up to our parent project, and we're going to put that there, but of course we've got to now give it that relative path. and we need to dump the autoloader again to get it to refresh its references, and then hopefully we'll now be back to an error message called unable to locate the asset mix file. Now remember we said before that we've got an issue with this application is it's being served out of a subdirectory, so it's actually requesting the wrong path to things, so it just cannot find what it's looking for. Let's go have a look at what it is looking for. So we'll go and find this mix class and see if we can fix this issue. And we'll close them all. MP mix. There it is. All right. So now it gets this path passed to it, and then it grabs the asset manifest file. So if we look in to the root of our web root here, it grabs this asset manifest file, and it then resolves the path using this manifest file. So we've now got to figure out, well, what's it looking for and how are we going to get it to find it properly. So it's got the manifest path here, and it says once we've loaded our manifest, we need to then look for the path here, and then this is where it's throwing the exception. So let's have a look at what indeed this manifest is. So I'm just going to reload, and this is our manifest array, and it's basically a mapping. It says in this manifest.json mix manifest, these are the files you're looking for, and these are the correct paths to give them. So first thing I notice is that this mix manifest has got a double / in it. Don't like the look of that. So this looks like where it's defined. So I'm just going to do a string replace, and I'm going to search for double /. I'm going to replace it with a single /, and that's our, let's see if that's fixed that. Right, it has. Now we're looking for WMS, and we're looking for JS. So the error message, if we just have a look at it again, just to remind ourselves, we're looking for this string, and so where is that string coming from? Let's have a look and find it. It's actually passed into this mix class. If we have a look at this next, and maybe we just need to put it in array so it'll dump and die it properly. So this is what it's looking for, and it's trying to look inside this array here, and obviously it's trying to map to this. So we need to remove the WMS, and we need to remove this trailing asset identifier. So I'm going to now modify the code to make that happen. So we just remove this. Right, so we want to change the path. So we want to change the path to remove. Now we could go string replace. Okay, we know that we're looking for that, and we want to get rid of it, and that we're going to pull that away. We also know that we want to explode our thing at the query string, and then just give ourselves the first, sorry, the 0th offset. And now let's have a look at whether that's done what we want. And yes, it has. So now the path it's looking for within this manifest.json will be matched properly and return the correct file. But that, unfortunately, is hard coding something that may change in other applications. So now let's look at making sure that this is a bit portable, if you like. So we're going to pass into this mix file some knowledge of the request. So to do that, we'll go into the top of this, we'll go public function construct, and I want a request, and by default you can give me null, I don't care. Then I want to assign, I don't really know why this is a static file, but it is, so let's just go private static okay, so that looks like what we'd need to do. We need to pass in the request so we can get this string at the bottom. So how are we going to do that? Let's generate our error again. And it worked perfectly. The reason why it won't generate is we're replacing this already. But let's just generate our error again. So we now need to go into our asset mixer helper, which is this parent. This is where this error is being generated from. Let's find it. Asset mix helper, and we've got a call to mix here for the CSS, and we've got a call to the mix function here, and we said we're going to pass in just the request so that we can modify the URL. So I go this get view and get request. So that's good. That will pass in a request for us every time it's called. So we'll do the same thing here. And just so that we can see that, we're going to dump and die here the self request as well, and see what happens there. So we've got the request here, and then we've got a bunch of attributes, and attributes, here we go, it's base. This base is this / here. So we want, if I just go here and go request get attribute and do base, just notice what is being called, and we can see that we've got that WMS now. So we can really now use this to make stripping off the WMS part dynamic. So we should now see, if we comment this out, that it will now work, but we've now passed in a bit more information so that it can strip off the base automatically. So from there, we're still, as we mentioned, trying to get back to this. So how is that going to be achieved? Look, let's have a look in here under usage. So it's saying here the root template is for Inertia page is template Inertia app. Now that is actually coming from, it will use the plugins template Inertia app. So let's go and look at the template in the Inertia. So we've got Inertia template Inertia app. So that's what it's using by default. So if I comment that out and then reload, the dispatch controller, of course, it's now going to say I looked for this and I can't find it. So now we're going to override, so this is the one it was looking for here. Now we're going to override this particular template with our own and put it somewhere easy to get to. So I'm just going to copy this and go down to templates. Going to create a new folder called Inertia and paste in our app.php, and we'll be back to having no error here. And now we want to extend this template so we've got part of our old CakePHP. So if we have a look at our index file here in our shipments index file, we see it's referencing, it's extending this Twitter Bootstrap dashboard. So we're going to do the same for ours, and we know that it's no longer that, it's now Inertia, and let's see what that does. So we've now extended the template, now it's pulling in everything, but we notice here that we have a missing functionality. If we go to the root of the application, we see a menu, but now that we're in the Inertia part of the application, and then we need to put this menu back. Now we can see when we click on the debug toolbar that the menu tree, so the thing that basically builds the menu query, is still there, and we've got a user object, identity object here. We've got a few things that we might need to pass through, but for some reason they are not getting to this Inertia enable page. So why is that? Well, the reason for that is if we go to our plugins, to our Inertia directory, go to our src folder, under view, we see that when an Inertia enabled controller is first accessed, it sends back Inertia web view, and then if your front end makes a request to the same controller using Inertia based React or whatever, it will then send JSON view back. So by default, this is what gets called when we do a get request, a first get request to an Inertia enabled page. And why is it not getting the menu tree through to here? Well, you can see what it's doing is when it does a render, it gets all the properties that have been set and bundles them into this props key, and then assigns everything to this page variable, and then sets simply a page here. So if we have a look at our inspect, and we go in here and then expand out our page, we can see that we have everything it's been bundled up. So we've got all the shipments that we're passing through for our index view, but then we've got a bunch of menu items here as well. You can see LFT field RGHT, so this is a menu tree behavior menu here. So all this is being bundled into the root div for the Inertia page, but we don't want it there, we want it available to the cake part of things. So now let's fix that. So what we can do, we can grab this, and we're going to just grab our props there, and then we're going to say, okay, I want props to pass to cake, and we're going to say, okay, we definitely want the user object because that gives us the ability to say who's logged in. We also want the menu tree variable because that gives our menuing, and now there is another one that's admin. So sometimes we might make a decision based on whether something is an admin or not. So we can go through here and go props to pass to cake as prop, and we can maybe set a variable, and we're going to say and that's going to be prop. So has that done what we want? Well, now what we want to say is, okay, these are the props that pass to cake. So not only want to pass the page through, we want to pass those keys through and to the parent view. Now let's have a look at that as we've done that. Now that's good. We've now gotten back our functionality. So we've now supplied to Cake all the basic Cake stuff it needs, even though it's an Inertia enabled controller being accessed. But we've still got an issue. We're passing in a lot of information, all this menu information here through to the Inertia div, and we don't want that. So now what we want to do is we want to strip these out of the props we pass to Inertia. So we want to say that the props is now going to be array diff by key. So we're going to say give me everything in the props except for the stuff that matches, and we need to do an array flip to flip the keys for the values, and we're just going to say props to pass to Cake. So now if we refresh, so we can see that we've got is admin there. So now we just want to go like this and reload, and we can see now that we've removed those variables that were being passed through, and we no longer have them as part of our Inertia root div. So now we've modified our Inertia web view enough to pass what we need through to Inertia, but pass what we need for Cake through as well. So that is now getting close, but what we now have an issue is we're clearly not fully inertiaized. Let's double check to see if what we're missing. So in our default layout, we've already specified a JS file, but what about the we also want to specify our CSS too. So I'm just going to close all these files down. I'm going to go back into templates, Inertia app, but we want the layout, so go back to our default layout, and here we see that we've got a asset mix script file, but we also want to include the CSS as well. See if that's done that. So we have a look in our head, we can find we've got the CSS and the nicely versioned CSS as well, and it's being pulled through by the client nicely. Now the next step is we've got an Inertia div, but it's currently down in this structure, and it's Inertia here, but the rest of all this is not Inertia, and we said we were going to make everything below the navbar accessible to Inertia. So let's do that now. To do that, let's go Inertia and JS and we'll Google Layout. Now here we see on the pages file, we have this ability to create layouts. So we might just create a layout file. So let's go into our assets here, and we've got a JavaScript folder here, and we can create a new folder just to contain things called components. Now we could also say new folder and just make it really obvious and create a new file called Layout and pop this in, and that's good. Now we need to tell Inertia about that. Now we've got a couple of options with persistent layouts. We can create the persistent layout by putting it into every single component, so InertiaJS component, or we can make it a default. Now here's the code that you have to modify. So we're just going to change, so we're going to have a default layout. If there's a layout defined at the component level, just give me that, but otherwise give me this default layout. So we're going to now do that. So I'm just going to copy that and go into our app.js, which is our root Inertia component, and we can see that at the moment the resolve function is a one-liner, but we're going to make it into a multiple line function. So we're going to let the page equals this require statement, because that's picking up the component. Then we're going to paste in our code and say apply a default layout if there's already one there, but otherwise return the layout. Now we need to pull that in, so I might say import layout, and that will then give us everything we need. So it's, yep, so let's reload our page now and see what happens. And it seems like I might just right. So at the moment it's not doing anything, and the reason it's not providing anything is it's looking for a dispatch index.js component. Let's just make that. So it's index, so it's JS pages, new folder, and it's dispatch, the name of the controller and the name of the action, but in capitals with a capitalized first letter. So index.js, so let's make a very export default, make it like this, oops, and then just return h1 and we'll call it index. Right, so theoretically that should now pull it in. But now what you can see is that this layout file that we've got in there and the index are all squished together where the div element is designed. So what we now need to do is need to modify our layout to make sure everything's being put in the right places. So we're going to now move our contact links and everything into this grey area, in the 2-column area, and this and the index will stay in the area, the 10-column area here. So how do we do that? So now we need to close off all of our files, go into our templates, into layout inertia, and the default template doesn't have a lot of detail, so we're going to leave that alone, but it's the dashboard template that specifies how everything's laid out. So we said we're going to remove everything below the nav bar, so that's what we're going to do. Now it can be tricky, these templates have a lot of nesting, so I'm just going to select everything under the nav bar and then keep going down until I get to a matching end statement that will mean it's happily at the end. So we've got these start statements, body start, and that's body end, start the body, start the end, start the body. So we've just basically taken all of that stuff out and gotten rid of it. If we now just do a reload, we can see now that it's moved the div right up to the top left. So now we're going to have to make some changes. So we now need to go into our layout file in our assets, front-end assets, go into layouts, and we're going to remove all of this, and we're going to paste in everything we cut out from our PHP layout. So I'm going to do a find and replace firstly to make the class name so it's happy with React, and then we know that we don't want any PHP code, so we're going to start removing all our PHP code. So this is all going, so we want to remove that alert to say we're in test environment, so we'll get rid of that. We need to get rid of that as well. Now it's saying that we've got 3 divs, 1, 2 and a main, that are no longer have, so we want to change that. Now our main component, so in dispatch index component is a child of this layout, and so it's going to be rendered here in our 10 column, or in some places it's 10 column layout. And we also, this is all in a row so that the nav and that go onto the same row, and then finally that makes everything. So we might say, okay, this is H5 actions, so we can see it. Now it's saying that we've got something wrong there, so we need to put a closing bracket there. Alright, so now we've provided a layout file, but if we come into our template here, we also see that these particular closing main div are being closed here as well, just the way the templating works. So we're just going to comment that out so that we don't have extra divs being inserted from the CakePHP side. Now when we reload, it should now show our completed Inertia enabled with CakePHP sections template with a persistent layout. So we now have everything in its proper place with the ability now to further develop our shipments index view that we're going to duplicate from our just normal CakePHP side of things. So that is probably stage 1 of this series of videos.